Greetings and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Run, and today we're playing as Eve. I feel like whenever I play Eve, I have a bit of a different strategy. Sometimes I just use my Razor Blade immediately so I trigger that Horror Babylon state and I have an increased damage, and that just makes it a little bit easier to deal with enemies. And sometimes I intentionally stay at 2 red health because I feel like maybe the entire environment is a bit too dangerous to tread, especially when you have enemies like Super Sloth and 4 Silkworms. I just feel like being at 1 red health container is very dangerous and you can essentially end up dying with just 1 shot. But I feel like what makes Eve great, or at least a very interesting character to play as, is that decision of when to use the Razor Blade is very much up to the player. You decide when to do it. If you feel like you're very unsafe, you can always just kind of come back to it and just never use it, because at least that way you have more hits of damage and maybe that gives you a little bit more time to deal with enemies. But if you feel like you're a very skilled player at the game, maybe you know your limits or whatever, you can start and use it immediately, and that would end up just increasing your damage a little bit, and maybe you feel safer that way. As I always say, the best defense in Isaac I feel like is offense, just because the more damage you do, the quicker the encounters are, which means that there are less room for unpredictability, especially with some random enemy movements and things like that. When you can deal with enemies in a super quick manner, that just helps you kind of go along and really avoid all of the unnecessary damage that it can deal you. And I feel like this particular example is the best one. So I tried to stay at 2 red health throughout the first floor, just because there is always a chance of an enemy being a champion version, of course, and then dealing 1 full heart of damage, and we could just end up dying. But as soon as I entered the room with Super Sloth, even though I think he does have some attacks which deal 1 full red heart of damage, I felt like even though we are in this position where we're relatively safe, just because there were 4 Silkworms and because Super Sloth has a lot of HP, it would be much better for us to just use the Razor Blade. We get the damage boost from that, we also get the damage boost from the transformation, and we also get Dead Bird. And all of those 3 things combined actually output quite a significant amount of DPS. And just because I felt like the fight would be over quicker, that would just make it a little bit more safe. Even if I was maybe in a more risky position, I feel like it's one of those trade-offs where maybe you're in a bit of a risky position, but at least if we get hit, maybe there's not always a chance of dying, because I think Silkworms only did half a heart of damage. So it's not like we were risking it all, but still in that same vein, it's a risky proposition, and it's more of that sense of kind of trying to risk it in order to get stronger, but you're also reducing risk by getting stronger, if that makes any sense. Those few sentences didn't really make any sense. But essentially what I'm trying to say is that the stronger you are, the less time you have to spend in the room, and that just makes you safer, even if maybe it does seem that you're actually risking more than you're gaining. Especially in this position, and Eve is one of those characters which I feel really complements and captures that essence well. And if you're looking at maybe the timeline of all the characters that exist in Isaac ever since from the Flash version and all the changes that there have been made, I feel like Eve has definitely progressed the most, and she's become one of these characters which isn't gimmicky. For example, someone like Lilith I would consider just a little bit gimmicky. So Eve doesn't have that feeling of gimmickness to it, but she still feels very unique and novel, and just an overall strong character. So she's actually one of those things which I really enjoy playing, but also enjoy kind of the mentality aspect of it. The strategies, when you have to think about, is it worth risking my red health to actually not be in the transformation state, so maybe I can use that to play the blood banks later on. And of course, if you do want to have more red health, then you can't be in the transformation state, and that means you're risking damage and speed and things like that. So it's always a balancing act, and I feel like it's very important to realize that, and it just gives some depth to the character, which I would say not a lot of characters in Isaac have. A lot of characters are pretty much cookie cutter. So you have something like maybe Judas, just stay alive for the very first 2 floors, use Book of Belial whenever you encounter a hard enemy, and because you're kind of limited inherently by the game and just by how the active items work, you really can't afford to do any more of that. But with Eve, it's very much a different story, and I do like the addition of the Razor Blade. I feel like that was definitely one of those things that just enhanced the entire mood of the game and just made this, like I said before, a much more strategic character. Okay, enough about Eve. Let's talk about the run for a little bit. So the first item we got was Rubber Cement, and it's one of those original items that came in Rebirth that we were all excited for. It just makes your tears bounce. It seems like such a novel and cool idea that just would work well with so many different items, and of course it does. And I feel like from the time I started playing this game, I still haven't had the soy milk plus rubber cement combo, just those two items in general. I feel like I did have high tear speed and rubber cement, and whenever you see those kind of tears bouncing around, it becomes really, really exciting. But I would maybe, if you want to equate this in the terms of power level, I would say the rubber cement is maybe akin to something like penetrative shots, but maybe a bit worse. I would say it works better when there are a lot of clusters of enemies in a very large, in a small area, but it works much worse than normal penetration when you have a lot of enemies in a large area. And when I say large area, I don't necessarily mean something like a room 2x2 size, but I just mean they're not tightly packed together. And I feel like in most cases the enemies aren't really, which I would say makes this item a little bit worse than just regular penetrative shots, but at least it has that concept of being fun and of course having some fun synergies to go alongside that. I always feel like these items, which maybe regularly only work with tears, should also have some, and not synergies, but yeah, I guess synergies is the right word, but I don't even necessarily mean to imply synergies, because that seems like a positive, but just some maybe alterations to other items. So for example, it works really well with Brimstone, because it bounces the actual beam off the wall and hits it right back, and obviously the same with Technology, but it doesn't really work with Mom's Knife. And of course, it's always kind of hard to think about how it would act, or maybe how it would do, but I always enjoy the idea of a knife actually just bouncing around the room and just maybe dealing more damage that way. It wouldn't be terribly effective, it wouldn't even necessarily be strong or whatever, it would just be a fun addition, I feel like, and especially when you have like a tier or maybe a barrage of knives, when you have Brimstone plus Mom's Knife, and of course if you had rubber cement, then you would just have a bunch of knives kind of flying and bouncing around. And I feel like all of those synergies are something that are missing from the game, and I always kind of miss them. But at least now with the modding tools we can make them ourselves, and I really feel like that's missing. There are a lot of obviously very cool mods, and a lot of people make mods for new items, or maybe they make new items which synergize well with the older items, but nobody just did the synergies, and I feel like that part is maybe missing a bit. But I also realize just how difficult and maybe time consuming it would be, because you're basically making a synergy for two items that are relatively rare, especially because of how many items in the game there are. So to get both of them at the same time and just to kind of code a unique synergy for every single one of them and every combination of items, which there are obviously a lot of, then that is just a bit more difficult. Obviously there's some way to maybe generalize it a little bit, so you don't have to specifically code every single synergy for every combination of items, but just in the overall case, I feel like this is something that can be avoided. And of course I do understand why people don't do it. Maybe I could code a few of those things myself. I'll see if I get the impression, or maybe if I have a really cool idea, but this actually sounds like a pretty cool concept that could be executed. If you have rubber cement and if you have any form of knives, just kind of make them bounce around a little bit. Okay, so later on in the run, when I went to the shop, I found compost, and compost is an item which I feel like, again, a lot of people don't really appreciate it, but it's a really, really strong item, especially when you combine it with something like the 9V, or in this case the AAA battery. And essentially when you reduce this item to only having one charge instead of two, it becomes just much more powerful. Because what this item does is, first of all, it takes every single consumable on the ground and transforms it into spiders or flies. I'm not sure if it's just a random chance, or maybe cards and maybe stronger consumables, so to say, get transformed into spiders, and maybe some weaker consumables get transformed into flies. If there is an algorithm, I'm not aware of it, but in any case, it still functions basically the same. And when you transform all of those consumables into your flies or spiders, it then doubles them. So essentially every time you use compost, you double with whichever spiders or flies you already have on you. So you can imagine if you have something like a one-room charge, this could get really out of hand really fast. And what ends up happening is you go into a room, your spiders and flies kill every single enemy in the room, and then you use it again because you only have one-room charge if you do have that synergy, and that allows you to kind of keep duplicating your flies and spiders, and that just allows you to deal with enemies much more efficiently. It's good in things like boss rush, especially now when you kind of get two charges for one, and that will probably be fixed sooner, at least in the next update. But as it is now, you can use once when you beat the wave, and then use it again when a new wave spawns, and that just makes it so you're not only doubling, you're quadrupling it. So for all of those reasons, I feel like compost is a really strong item at this point. And what's maybe the worst thing about it, or maybe the best, depending on how you look at it, it really doesn't require much. You just have to buy it, and it's essentially enough to carry you through the rest of the game. It doesn't have a lot of potency against enemies like Hush, but for that reason, of course, we have Mom's Knife. But it works really well for basically any other room or any other boss, because it does just allow you to kill enemies just that easily. So we did get to the end with 21st place and 49,000 points. It's a bit on the low side, but the main reason for that is I spent a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of bombs and just consumables overall to try to get maybe something from the shop. Because I had restock, I felt like it might be a good idea to spend a bit of money just to maybe wager my chances a little bit in hopes of getting an item which would maybe increase my chances of getting either more swag or just maybe make it a bit more certain that I'm gonna get a breaking synergy later on. Maybe what I should have done is just bought a lot of cards, because with the room bag eventually I would have gotten something like a temperance card or maybe a slot machine or even a judgment card, and what I could have done is used all of that in the secret room, dropped it, and then of course bombed it to get an item pedestal and just hope that maybe the room bag would give me something like a Yarrow rune or maybe a Persia rune, and I would be able to reroll that into hopefully something that would allow me to either do the floor again or maybe I would get a blank card. So all of those things I feel like would be good, but I maybe just kind of misconstrued my resources that I had into items instead of cards. So maybe if I kind of had to do the run again, I would keep that in mind and I would definitely maybe go that route. So learn from my mistakes, and I hope that my last thought or maybe sentence made sense. So if it did, please let me know. If something of course didn't make sense, I'll try to explain it a little bit better in text in the comments. And this ending is going on for way too long, so I'm just gonna end it here. I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.